Welcome to Mindshock True Crime. This is your host, Bruce McGuire, and you are listening to the Johnny Gosch series. This is episode 9, Noreen Gosch. And Noreen Gosch is naming names. She actually gave me permission to share her thoughts in emails. So we will be going over some major bombshells, connections to other cases, and possibly even further evidence of a vast government conspiracy involving not only the Johnny Gosch case, but countless of other missing persons cases, possible MK Ultra trauma-based mind control, and criminal networks predating Epstein, of course. This is the post-Epstein era, so even the most gullible of goof, coincidence theorists, and authority-worshipping cultists look quite silly, not even raising an eyebrow or just flat out denying any possibility of government corruption or government involvement in missing persons cases. It's very, very strange, of course. As always, if you want to help support the podcast, keep up awareness in unsolved cases, cold cases, missing persons cases, wrongful convictions, and more, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. You could also be a YouTube member right here on YouTube. Help support the channel that way. Make sure you're subscribed, like and share, Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon. Patrons do get priority for case, topic, logical analysis, co-podcaster requests. You could also be a guest on the podcast depending on your tier. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comments section. So, yeah, I mean, this is obviously a very problematic case. If you haven't checked out the previous 8 episodes, the first 7 episodes are here on Mindshock. The 8th episode is over on the Bruce McGuire channel. You could check that out as well. And we are going to be going over even more information from Noreen Gosch. Now, Noreen Gosch, of course, has a lot of critics. Most of them are just clueless coincidence theorists, bootlicking authority-worshipping cultists. But over the years, over the decades, it seems like Noreen Gosch has been vindicated for just about everything she said. Because the first couple years, and even decades, a lot of this stuff hadn't come out yet, or at least not definitively. But now, looking back, it looks like she was pretty much on the money every step of the way, from Franklin scandal corruption, from law enforcement corruption, and even nationwide and international corruption and trafficking. I mean, it's astounding, mind-shocking, if you will, at how on the money Noreen Gosch was about a lot of things. Now, certain things obviously haven't been proven true that she has said, or at least not yet. They haven't been proven untrue. But just based on the track record alone, if you don't know what I'm talking about and you're just a triggered goof, again, go back and watch the previous episodes. I'm not going to be going over dozens of hours of podcasts in every single episode. We are building on the previous episodes. So here are a few emails Noreen had shared with me and her thoughts, and she has given me permission to share them. And what's curious, again, is a lot of this information matches early rumors. I mean, it's weird. A lot of these true crime cases, these rumors turn out true. I mean, widespread conspiracy cases or not, even regular non-conspiratorial cases, a lot of the times the early rumors all turned out to be true. Isn't that kind of weird? Obviously, coincidence theorists, I mean, plenty of coincidences for them to shake a stick at. I mean, obviously they do like talking about this case and pretending that there just couldn't be a conspiracy for some reason. I mean, I don't really get it, but there's a lot of goofs out there. So let's go over these emails. So this was the first of a few recent ones. I listened to the podcast you did today. It was really good. I appreciate your attention to detail, and I was happy to hear you mention John David Norman. So, again, I went over this in previous episodes regarding these rings of traffickers that have all these connections. Quite a vast web of corrections. Just go into the chat real quick. Aunt B is here. I live 30 miles from where Johnny lived at the time of his disappearance. His wagon is on display at the Iowa State Fair. My heart aches for his parents and family. So let me continue the email here. Obviously, Norman connected to quite a few things. As we finally learned after decades of investigation, he was indeed the man who purchased Johnny, calling himself the Colonel. Not to be confused, of course, with the Air Force Colonel Aquino, who was admitted Satanists going on mainstream media talk shows regarding Satanism. I mean, this stuff is bonkers. And obviously, the coincidence theorists ignore all of that. It's quite weird. So apparently, there's more than one individual known as the Colonel involved. Noreen is saying here that somehow they have evidence resulting from the investigation that John David Norman was the one who purchased Johnny, calling himself the Colonel. He was also connected with John Wayne Gacy, who went by the name the General. So Gacy was going by the General. And again, for all the people who think she's just making this stuff up, I mean, clearly it's coming from somewhere, and it seems kind of weird. I mean, these are professional investigators. They've been doing this a long time. Obviously, they know how to vet tips and verify tips. Obviously, they're not just believing everybody that comes out of the woodwork with stories. They're corroborating. Just like, again, Bonacci, one of the most important whistleblowers of all time, possibly. I mean, all of his information happens to add up. I mean, he knows the layout of the White House. He's winning $1 million judgments in court. I mean, obviously, those records are sealed, so we don't know exactly what was presented. I mean, it's just bonkers how much evidence there actually is. I mean, there's a mountain of evidence of corruption and conspiracy here. Now, obviously, that doesn't mean it's definitively known exactly what happened to Johnny, but there's a lot of shady scum circling the area and the case. So, it is a new type of organized crime in our country, not to be confused with Al Capone style of organized crime. And in my speeches 40 years ago, I was telling audiences of this organized effort to buy and sell children, approximately 25 years before they gave it the name of human trafficking. Now we have an epidemic of these crimes taking place. Few make the headlines. And I do have to jump in again here because a lot of goofs and coincidence theorists, they hallucinate that because, 800,000 to 1 million of reported missing children in the United States, most of them are found. These goofs completely ignore all the children that aren't reported missing in the first place. They completely ignore the internationally trafficked children that wouldn't be reported missing from inside the U.S. since they went missing in other places. I mean, just the level of gophery of these clueless coincidence theorists and authority-worshipping cultists in trying to dismiss, this level of evil and deny justice or even investigation into this. I mean, think about the level of evil these goofs are propagating by trying to pretend that not that many go missing or whatever. I mean, even if it's less than 800,000, I mean, even if most of them are returned, I mean, there's still a stunning number, tens of thousands that aren't. I mean, that's a staggering, that's inside the U.S. only of those reported missing. So that doesn't even factor all the missing that weren't reported. That doesn't even factor those internationally trafficked. So just the level of goofer here is sickening by these coincidence theorists going around in the comment sections and all over social media, just trying to downplay this evil and denying justice and investigation. I mean, this is why it goes on, because there's so many goofs like that this can just continue. But going back to the email, a number of men involved in this web of organized pedophilia adopted military titles for themselves. I do not know all of the names, only a few, but I was told by an investigator there was a lieutenant, captain, the chief, and the general who was Gacy. And the children were called cadets. I mean, how sickening is that? And we finally learned the name of Tony, who helped toss Johnny in the car the morning of the kidnapping. His real name was Philip Pask. He died in prison some years ago, but he was spotted in 2 other kidnappings on the West Coast, and all the witnesses agreed it was the same man, including Paul Bonacci. By using the fake titles, the kids would not ever know real names, so it was protecting the pedophiles by keeping their identities secret. That information was a long time coming. It has been helpful with a few more pieces in this jigsaw puzzle. Thank you for all you're doing to keep the awareness alive for these cases. Information is slowly being brought to the surface. So, yeah, I actually went over the whole Tony and Pask connection, including matching up sketches and all of that in the previous episodes. Again, rumors of this and their involvement, and obviously Bonacci's testimony. I mean, this has been around for a long time, but it looks like there might be some movement here, some verification here. So this was my response. Sounds like connections are still being made. Obviously, if you do not feel comfortable answering, I understand, but from an outside perspective, it seems like Johnny's trip to the Air Force Base in the summer might not have been coincidental. You had mentioned Colonel Michael Aquino before. He seems to have connections to many places, including Colorado ranches, possibly the one Bonacci pointed out as well. Do you feel he might have had a role in Johnny's abduction or other similar abductions? So that was the question I posed to Noreen, because that's something I just can't dismiss. I mean, I'm just not a coincidence theorist like that. I just can't do it. That was one of the details that just jumped out, and Noreen actually gave a lot more to this. So the response here: when the case unfolded to the point of learning about Paul Bonacci and visiting him in prison, he explained how the Monarch MK Ultra was being done at Offutt Air Force Base to other kids and himself. But as he got older, the programming began to break down, which is true of a lot of victims. And suddenly they were having the memory of things they were forced to do. At that time, Michael Aquino came to Omaha and personally reprogramming Bonacci again while he was under their control. While in Omaha, Aquino did a TV interview promoting his Temple of Set religion, and I learned he made other visits to that part of the Midwest. The Monarch program was his baby, so to speak, and it is possible to program various things at the brainwave levels, alpha, beta, etc., and program the victim to not recall anything they did, making a real-life Manchurian candidate. Now, for those that haven't listened to the Satanic Ritual Abuse Documented Cases podcast I did, I went over a number of hours, multiple hours of just documented cases, psychologists, psychiatrists on record of thousands of cases, and all of this information about the brain waves and exactly how this trauma-based mind control was all done, it pretty much all matches up. What a coincidence. I mean, maybe it all is coincidental. I don't know, but you could check out that podcast for more details there. Obviously, listener discretion is advised. When all this information came out, it was just too unbelievable for some, and victims were labeled as nuts, mentally disturbed, etc. But the program did exist and was used. When victims were interviewed as to why did they think it was so important to Aquino to program these young people, the answer from the victim was, quote, Aquino was creating an army-type group of people who could be triggered to perform whatever he wanted them to do, including take over our country. But it all failed as the programming began breaking down some years after the victim had been programmed. Which is also relatively realistic, right? I mean, literally anything you train for, if it's not kept up, it's going to atrophy. I mean, everything from just sport skills or even mental acuity. I mean, if you don't use it, you lose it. So, especially if this was all kind of experimental. So, who knows how they had this dialed in. Later, Aquino was the head of the NSA, which I did not know at the time. I requested through the Freedom of Information Act a copy of a paper Aquino wrote about programming the brain, titled From PSYOPs to Mind War. I received a reply from the NSA saying, quote, they would not be able to grant my request because it would interfere with national security, end quote. I learned a few months later that Aquino was the head of the NSA at the time. So I actually couldn't find verification of this. So apparently it's still classified. I don't know how she verified this. She said it was... I mean, actually, he did write this paper, though. This is verified in numerous sources, including the Mind War book. Apparently, From PSYOP to Mind War accidentally became public. It was a 1980 obscure internal U.S. Army concept paper. And there are a ton of references to this. So that has been verified. And you can actually find the whole thing. I probably will do a breakdown on that as well on a different episode. Carol Stanhope in the chat. This case is close to my heart as I escaped from human traffickers in 1976. Heart goes out to you, Carol. Yeah, I mean, obviously it is incredibly underreported. But, I mean, it seems like that's changing, though. It seems like the last couple years in the post-Epstein era, a lot of this stuff is getting more awareness. And even the most devout coincidence theorists might find it a little bit more troubling. I mean, they're pretty devout, though, in denying any of this. It's pretty bizarre, of course. Again, I do not have a source on Aquino actually being the head of the NSA at any time. However, the From PSYOPs to Mind War is verified, multiple sources. You could actually find the full text online and many references to its legitimacy. Now, you could say it's disinfo, but it was still actually published and released. It was released, and that can be verified. As far as Aquino being the head of the NSA, I could not find a citation for that. But again, everything else Noreen has said is eventually vindicated, so perhaps we'll find out about that as well. If any of the Mindshock listeners do have a citation for that, it would be interesting to see a source on that. Obviously, if it's all classified, we might not ever get one. About 2 weeks after I got that letter from the NSA, I received a phone call from Linda Blood. Yes, that's her real name. She said, quote, I heard you requested a copy of Mikey's paper, end quote, From PSYOPs to Mind War. Oh, not end quote. That's just the title, From PSYOPs to Mind War. I have copies. I will send you one. She did so, and it came in the mail a few days later. Then began a series of phone calls to my home from Linda Blood, and she would ask only one question. Noreen, have you become ill yet? I mean, that's a bizarre question. My answer would be no. Why on earth would she ask me such a question? So I delved into her background a bit and learned that she was Aquino's mistress for a time. So, following that info about her, I did not answer my phone when she called over and over with the same question. I mean, that sounds like a weird programming as well. Just drumming that into the psyche, into the subconscious that you should become ill. I let the calls go to the answering machine. Eventually, she stopped making the calls. I believe that in some way, Aquino was a figure in the abuse and kidnappings of children for this project throughout the country. And it wouldn't surprise me if he also knew and or worked with the Colonel, John David Norman, who created a vast network of organized pedophilia business. We are still finding out information on him, including the fact that he purchased Johnny from Emilio, one of the men who kidnapped my son. Emilio had a kidnapping business and worked with a man going by the name of Tony, whose real name was Philip Pask, a notorious pedophile responsible for many crimes against children in our country. He died in prison November 98. Philip Pask worked with John David Norman and John Wayne Gacy for a period of time also. Info regarding all of this was made available to us from a former victim. Once we had the real names of these men, we were able to trace their movements and see a pattern of who knew and worked with whom. It took a long time to get the names. And again, I have to just a quick aside again for the coincidence theorists, because for whatever reason, a lot of these coincidence theorists, they just hallucinate that for some reason criminals can't act alone. It's a really weird thing. I mean, these conspiracy deniers and coincidence theorists, like in any business, I mean, even the criminal business, drug dealers work in gangs or cartels. Mafias of all kind do deals with different mafias. I mean, it would actually be more surprising that if they didn't work alone. I mean, obviously there are those that do work alone. Wendy Kirby says it's all connected. Carol says Noreen is a modern day Joan of Arc and still beautiful. Yeah, it's so weird how she actually has critics. Like, even if people don't believe her or whatever, to actually criticize her, I mean, that's really weird. That, maybe I'm just crazy, but I think that's just really weird to me. That she has all these haters specifically going after her online. Unless, of course, they're shills, because if the conspiracy is true, obviously a lot of money goes into online propaganda and trying to discredit the truth tellers, especially if they're pointing the finger at the corrupt, at the string pullers. So that would actually make sense. Continuing the email here, years ago, a PI that I hired said to me, quote, Noreen, if you investigate every piece of info that comes to you, you will eventually learn the truth of what happened to your son, end quote. I hung on all these years, investigating every shred of info that we found. Slowly, the bigger picture began to emerge. The Franklin Credit Union was laundering money for NAMBLA and others. The money to set up and run the Franklin Credit Union was donated by Warren Buffett's wife. And the Warren Buffett enigma, there were other rumors on Reddit and other places that actually tied Warren Buffett to even protecting certain criminals and getting them out of jail, etc., in the area. And again, this all matches up. I mean, again, it's just weird. Like, all these different sources and rumors, everything's matching up. It's kind of weird. Obviously, this is Mindshock. I do not claim anything is true or untrue. I do not claim anyone is innocent or guilty. I'm just looking at these things and saying maybe they're not coincidences. Larry King of Franklin was a pedophile, and even after being released from prison, he was back online bragging that he had 3,020 photos of Johnny Gosch and would make them available a few at a time on a pedophile message board. So that's a very specific number. I was called by a detective in Australia who was tracking the message board. He told me what he found and asked how he could help me. I asked him to try and coax that individual, going by a screen name only, to write an email to him. Then I could get the IP and trace who was offering all these photos. To my surprise, it was coming from Reston, Virginia, in the house where, anyone want to take a guess who was living in this house that the IP traced to? All allegedly, of course. Anyone want to take a guess? Are we going to be surprised by this? It was none other than Larry King of the Franklin Credit Union. Does anybody find this surprising at this point? I mean, I don't know. We're so far into this web with all of these connections. It's, it's this Mindshock on top of Mindshock. Very, very bizarre. I contacted the National Missing Children's Org and gave them the info. They contacted the FBI in D.C. A raid of that home was scheduled for February of that year. Only a few hours before the planned raid, the FBI canceled the raid. Nothing happened, no arrest, nothing. The representative at the National Center called me and said, quote, "We are now ready to agree that Johnny's kidnapping was organized pedophilia and an attempt to cover it up has taken place," end quote. So this is what Noreen Gosch is saying the National Missing Children's Organization had told her. The IP address was correct. It was King who had all the photos, but he was given plenty of time to clean up and clear out. Following this dog and pony show, King was nowhere to be found. He disappeared for a number of years, aided by the FBI. I have another book coming out, but there is enough material on Johnny's case to write a couple more. I seriously think that none of the law enforcement, going clear back to that first day when the police chief labeled Johnny a runaway and the FBI refused to enter the case, they expected me to collapse in grief. They were not prepared for me to fight back and gather enough info, learning the names of the despicable people who took my boy. It is accurate that a number of them are dead now, but there is still one who is living. Maybe there is someone in law enforcement who would do the right thing. So, I mean, this is so shocking and heartbreaking that there were multiple raids, because there was the other raid that supposedly Noreen's husband, Leonard Gosch, somehow prevented or gave the tip-off. So this happened not once, but twice. 2 canceled raids that might have blown this case wide open and many other cases. This was the Kerr raid. Again, I went over this extensively in previous podcasts, so if you haven't checked them out, you can check them out. But so we have not one, but 2 raids canceled inexplicably. What does that mean? I mean, it's just... I mean, if that doesn't scream corruption, what does it scream? Another email here. Sorry I missed answering your question. I'm okay with answering it. I just forgot to include it in the previous message. Okay. I do feel that the trip to Offutt Air Force Base was planned. No coincidence. Johnny's father was so insistent that Johnny go with him on that business trip. He had never taken any of the kids on a business trip before. How coincidental. So the first ever business trip that Leonard Gosch goes on, he takes Johnny with him. The first ever time Johnny goes to deliver the papers by himself, he's kidnapped. I mean, how high does the coincidence stack go? I mean, this is just mind-shocking. I feel Johnny may have been tested or indeed programmed to some extent. When they came back, I expected him to be bubbling over with things to tell me about the big planes, etc. at the Air Force Base. But he was subdued. And when I would ask a question about it, he would just say he couldn't quite remember that much about the Air Force planes. Very out of character for Johnny. So, yeah, this was also actually brought up by a commenter. I forgot on which podcast in the YouTube comments about how Noreen doesn't really talk about Leonard Gosh. But she has mentioned quite a few things, including those late night phone calls. I mean, just a lot of shadiness regarding Johnny's father. And again, I am not claiming anything is true or untrue, but this set of circumstances, I mean, if you're doing true, honest investigation, the truth is not afraid of investigation. So, what kind of an honest investigator wouldn't look at all these aspects? And I also do believe that Aquino was involved at some level with the kidnapping. On the programming end of it, after Johnny was kidnapped. But Johnny was chosen. Photos were taken of him 2 weeks prior by someone in a white car using a telephoto long lens, and the car had California plates on it, stolen plates. A neighbor witnessed it. Why was he picked or chosen? I do not know, but I think Aquino was the one who handpicked him. Then Emilio, who had a kidnap for hire business, was hired to do the actual kidnapping. His accomplices were Tony, Philip Hask, and the driver of the blue van, the last man standing. And since I wrote my previous email to you, a former friend of Sam Soda's confirmed that Sam admitted to him that he was in the car, the station wagon with the wood sides, parked on the street above where Johnny was kidnapped, and he watched the whole thing take place. Okay, whoa. Because this is the first time I've ever heard of this, but this would explain the two different cars. Because a lot of times, there were a lot of people, including coincidence theorists, just casting doubt on this whole thing and all of the reported witnesses. If there were two different vehicles with two different suspicious men, or more, obviously, that would actually explain everything that happened that morning. Would it not? Because if Soda was there, either just, an evil scumbag wanting to watch this go down for kicks, or just to see that it was, to confirm it, like, some kind of mafioso overseeing some kind of deal just to confirm that it happened. But, yeah, this is insane. Sam brought the photo of Johnny to a motel room where they all stayed the night before the kidnapping and said, "Here is the kid we are taking tomorrow." When I met Bonacci in prison, he told me that Sam Soda was there watching the whole kidnapping and described exactly the make, model of the car with the wood side panels on it. And the back door would open both ways, up and down, and hinged for a side-to-side opening. Only one manufacturer had a model like that, and it was the Ford station wagon. I got in touch with Motor Vehicles Department in Des Moines after Bonacci telling me all of that, and sure enough, Sam had the vehicle registered to him. So Sam Soda has the exact vehicle registered that Bonacci... So if Bonacci's making it all... Like, how would Bonacci know all of this if he's making it all up? There's still people out there saying that Bonacci made it up. I mean, it's weird. Just the level of cope of these coincidence theorist goofs. It's just crazy. We are so close on this case with the new information and getting the IDs of more of the people involved. What I'm trying to do now is trying to confirm the whereabouts of said individuals and the time frames which would connect to Johnny. We have John David Norman and Philip Pask in the Midwest, Des Moines and Omaha well documented now in their association with John Wayne Gacy. And another good friend of Norman's named Eric Kimble. Okay, so who's ready for yet another mind shock here regarding known Gacy associates? So she's not breaking any news here regarding Eric Kimble being connected to Gacy. I don't know exactly what the connections to Norman are. I'm assuming those are known as well. So she said, "We are working with info concerning him now, and I think he may still be alive. But there are a few others I want to connect with Larry King. Most of the others are dead, but this timeline is important to me. There will not be any type of justice concerning those who have died, but I owe it to my son to finish this with the rest of the story," as Paul Harvey would have said in his famous radio broadcasts. So let's look at this individual, Norman So Kimble here. So she cited the name Eric Kimble. Huh. This is actually kind of weird. Wait a second. I might have got the wrong guy here. Oh, I might have totally fudged this up. Oh yeah, I totally fudged this up. Wow, major mistake for Bruce McGuire of Mindshock. Probably the biggest mistake I've ever made on this podcast. This is not the same guy. Oh, wait a second. Eric Kimble is his son? What? Huh. So this is on a public obituary. This is Norman A. Kimble. Then Eric Kimble, I'm not sure if this is his son. Eric with a K. And in the obituary, it's also Eric with a K. So, again, I'm not 100% on this. This is all theoretical. I do not claim anything is true or untrue, as usual, on Mindshock. I am not claiming anything is true. So this person on the screen is not Eric Kimble. It is Norman Kimble. Coincidentally, Norman. I mean, we have so many Normans here. It's crazy. So apparently, this Eric Kimble, not the guy on the screen, possibly the son of the guy on the screen, apparently county jail inmate bites self in arm in suicide attempt. So this is Bloomington, Illinois, the Pantograph newspaper, August 2nd, 1987. County jail inmate bites self in arm in suicide attempt. An inmate at the Champaign County Jail charged with harboring a national pornography kingpin tried to commit suicide by biting himself and is recovering under guard at a local hospital, authorities said. Eric Kimble, 20, tried to kill himself at about 2:45 a.m. yesterday by biting a vein in his arm, said Lieutenant Kenneth Roderick of the Champaign County Sheriff's Department. Kimble had been placed in isolation because he had been uncooperative with authorities since his arrest Wednesday on charges of harboring a fugitive. He had been arrested with John David Norman. So if this Eric Kimble is the son of Norman Kimble, but so the son is apparently connected with John David Norman. I mean, how many Normans are there? This is crazy. First name, last name. I mean, Norman's not that popular. So, Norman, 59, who has been described by authorities as a national pornography kingpin. Norman was a fugitive from Pennsylvania and is being held in Champaign County Jail on a $1 million bond, Roderick said. Roderick said he had no info on charges against Norman in Pennsylvania. Jail guards had been checking on Kimble in his isolation cell every 15 minutes before the incident yesterday, Roderick said. Okay, so if this Eric Kimble is the son of Norman Kimble, this is the obituary for Norman Kimble that I'm about to read, whose son is maybe Eric Kimble. So Norman Kimble, here's the obituary here. Norman A. Kimble, age 88, passed away Friday, August 26, 2022. He was born March 30th, 34 in Chicago, the son of Glenn and Lillian Kimble. Following high school graduation, Norman proudly served in the U.S. Army during the Korean conflict. Norman was united in marriage to Martha Wasson, January 1565, in Nuremberg, Germany. So I wonder if he was stationed at the same base with Jeffrey Dahmer and several other serial killers. I don't know. He continued his studies following the war and graduated from the University of Southern Illinois and did further MA and PhD studies at the University of Chicago. Early in his career, Norman worked in D.C. for anyone want to guess which agency? This guy worked for the NSA. So if this is indeed Eric Kimble's father, he worked for the NSA in the field of cryptographic coding and radio signals intelligence. Interesting frequencies. Norman later worked as a nuclear power plant inspector at Braidwood Nuclear Power Station in Illinois. He was a member of the American Legion, post number 2910. Norman enjoyed the simple things in life and being with his family. He's survived by his daughter, son, Eric Kimble, and several others. So, again, I could not verify whether this indeed is Eric Kimble's father, Norman Kimble, but it says he has a son, Eric Kimble, Eric with a K, and this guy worked for the NSA, and his son gets involved with these criminal networks, if that's his son. Again, I do not claim anything is true or untrue here on Mindshock. I do not claim anyone is innocent or guilty of anything at any time. So that's quite mind-shocking. That's quite mind-shocking. I mean, how many people are connected with the CIA, the NSA, MK Ultra in this case? It's just absolutely insane. I mean, how many coincidences do we have to have here? Noreen sent one more email here. It would be all right to read my feelings about these concerns. I do not have the answers to all of it yet, but it is still an area of investigation. I do feel that Aquino had some part in the kidnapping of my son. I do not know exactly what it was, but more than likely had to do with programming, since that was his brainchild. And I do feel that the trip to Offutt Air Force Base was no coincidence. After learning that is where programming of children had taken place. So apparently she also says she has other information, no sources cited, that programming did occur at that particular Air Force base. I believe I also asked her about Epstein. She says, we don't know the extent of Jeffrey Epstein's involvements yet. Nothing would surprise me anymore. He could have been linked with some involved in the crimes in the Midwest, Omaha, and Des Moines. It is a vast network of this new type of organized crime. And if he wasn't, surely some of his associates, some of the clients may have intersected with these scum operating in the Des Moines area. And obviously there's many connections to Colorado. There's many connections all over the place. There's no end in sight regarding the amount of CIA, military, NSA overlaps here in this case. Because if Aquino himself was formerly the head of the CIA, did Aquino personally know Eric Kimble as well as his father, Norman Kimble? I mean, the plot really thickens here if this Kimble connection is really legitimate. If Eric Kimble's father is indeed Norman Kimble, again, I am not saying that is true. There's a lot of goofs get triggered. I do not make claims here. I ask questions and I go over many, many different theories. Many of them mutually exclusive. So this case, just no end in sight regarding the Mindshocks. I will also be doing a dedicated John Wayne Gacy series. There's just a lot there. There's just a lot. I mean, it's never ending. And then once we add the bases in Germany, it seems like a whole lot of serial killers moved through there. And who knows how many other criminal ring leaders or those involved in criminal enterprise went through the U.S. bases in Germany. I mean, there's just no end in sight to the stack of these coincidences. It's just absolutely mind-shocking. Absolutely mind-shocking. But, yeah, Noreen has been vindicated at every turn thus far. A lot of her claims were mostly unsubstantiated throughout the years and decades until now. Past few years, it's come out that pretty much all of her claims have been spot on. Now, of course, there's many other claims that have not yet been corroborated, but it might not be too much longer before those are either. I mean, her track record is just, it's really impressive. It's really impressive. I start all of these true crime cases, I try to be as objective as possible. Usually, I don't even like to talk directly to any people involved. But I mean, I'm not going to ignore emails if people do email me. And I didn't know what to think at the beginning. I really didn't. I wasn't pro or against. I mean, I wasn't against or for Noreen. I was objective on the sidelines. But at a certain point, after a certain amount of investigation, when people are just vindicated at every turn for their claims, no matter how seemingly incredible those claims are, I mean, verification from other sides, I mean, it's just, yeah, I mean, it is what it is, right? Objective, logical, neutral. That's the name of the game here on Mindshock, where the only thing we know for sure is that we don't know anything for sure. More episodes to come, plenty more to dissect and examine here on the Mindshock podcast. Hope all the listeners found another episode of the Mindshock True Crime Podcast interesting and informative. You want to help support the channel, help keep up awareness in all these cases, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. You can also become a YouTube member right here on YouTube. Help support the channel that way. Make sure you subscribe, like, and share. Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section. This is Bruce McGuire signing off. Catch you guys next time.